I thought I'd do this as something slightly different. This is my first time making a video racing on any platform other than Zwift. This is my sort of story of racing a 4-stage event on IndieVelo. I was taking on the Moon Riders Tour. It was a case of 4 stages over 4 separate days. These began with an individual time trial before taking on a flatter sprinter stage. Then we had a punchy hilly circuit with multiple repeats of a short punchy climbs, and then it finished off on day 4 with quite a hilly queen stage. The event had general classification, it had a sprinter's jersey, it had a hill climb jersey, and like I say, it was something I was really quite looking forward to. This is something I'd done sort of in the past when the Moon Riders Tour used to be on RGT, but this was my first opportunity getting involved in a multi-day event, actually over on IndieVelo. So this video will take us through each stage one by one and just kind of recount the tour as a whole. So the first stage was an individual time trial that riders were allowed to take on at any point that suited them over the course of 3 days. For myself, I could actually only ride it on the Monday, so I was going to be taking on these 4 stages one day after the other. Something to look forward to, and hopefully can make quite a good video of it. Okay, so we've dropped into stage 1, which was the prologue, short TT. This, like I said in the kind of intro, you were able to do this race at any point over 3 days, over the Saturday, Sunday, Monday. For myself, the only slot I could actually make was the 7 o'clock Monday evening slot, which was the final one. I'd had a look at some of the times that have come out over the weekend, and the leading time was 9 minutes 39 seconds. So it was 3 laps of the South Lake Loop, which is a pretty flat circuit. For myself, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to get anywhere near that time. I'm not hugely experienced in racing on IndieVelo. I've done a bit. I haven't done masses. So for me, I'd set a target power that I was hoping to kind of to stick to, and then basically it would play out however that plays out. Distance-wise, it was 7.4 kilometers, and whilst everyone, as you can see, starts together, draft is turned off. So you're not receiving any draft from any of these other riders, but everyone starts at the same time. Another thing is that on IndieVelo, the equipment you choose, so your bike choice or wheel choice, has no impact on your speed. The speed is purely down to your sort of positioning on the road, the power you put in, etc. So it's just on the standard bike, and basically for myself here, I'd set roughly the target of heading out for the first maybe 5.5k at around 370 to 380 watts. I am a little bit higher than that currently. That was the sort of target I set myself, and then over the last 2 kilometers, if I was able to raise that, I wanted to raise that then, basically as much as I could. So I am shooting a little bit higher than what my sort of target was. I wasn't focusing too much on these riders that are up the road ahead. It really, my sort of pretty much my pure focus was that power number smack bang in the middle of the screen. I was just kind of keeping focused on that and just trying to maintain a fairly steady power, just really for the duration. Okay, so there's no real need to bore you with the full TT, so I've skipped forward through just the last 1.5 kilometers. As you can see, there was Nick there 3 seconds out ahead of me, and our gap stayed sort of quite consistent throughout the race, but I have managed to put distance into kind of everyone behind. I mean, the next closest rider behind me is 13 seconds down. The effort really started to bite here. I tried raising the power slightly. My power did drop after that initial maybe bit of excitement out of the pens. It sort of stabilised at maybe 375, 380. But just over the last kilometre up to this point, and for the remainder of this effort, I've just try to raise it and just kind of empty the tank. I'm trying to hold, kind of keep it over 400 towards 430, 440, and just try and hold that as best I can, basically to the line. There's about 500 meters left here, so we head around the corner. I have actually just backed off the power here around the corner, because that's one of the little nuances of racing on IndieVelo, which I'll get on to discuss when I talk about stage 2, is that some corners you can only take a certain speed through. You can't just go through it as hard as you want and sort of bowl through it at 70, 80 k an hour. The game actually slows your speed down. So when that speed flashes red, any power you're putting out kind of over that is just wasted effort. So I thought I'll back off slightly and then just give myself an extra little kick towards the line. So I finished there 4.3 seconds down on Nick, and that actually, when all the results were sort of looked at and organised into the final table, I actually was 35 seconds down on the winner. So I was quite happy with that. I mean, I know that effort I put my best into. So I was 35 seconds down heading into here, which is our stage 2. This stage was down as the sprint stage of the event. So it was on a very flat circuit, the coastal loop reverse. We were going to do 2 laps of this circuit. Quite the flat route, very, very little elevation gain. And it was something that I was looking really, really forward to. It should be the stage, out of the 4 stages here that make up the Moon Riders Tour, it should have been the stage that I was personally going to be able to do best at. 32.1 kilometers long. Like I say, very, very flat. So 49 riders roll out from the pens here. And it is important to say, actually, that a lot of the races, that if anyone has raced on IndieVelo, a lot of the races do actually have bots in that are kind of programmed to be able to react to your own personal power profile. This is a race that doesn't have any bots. So all the riders here are actual genuine riders. They're not bots. They are people at home on the turbo trainers taking part in the race. It is a bot-free event. So 49, really, really good. I think it was 69 people completed the prologue. There's 49 here in this time slot of stage 2, which was the biggest time slot. It was 7 o'clock UK evening time. So that'll make it 8 o'clock sort of continental Europe. It's a time when there's a lot of riders on the platform. So it was a stage I was really looking forward to, a stage I was hoping to get a good result in. So there wasn't likely to be any big GC gaps here. So that 35 seconds was not something that was ever likely to come back at all or get smaller on this stage. It would be a stage you could lose time if you got caught the wrong side of a split. But this stage was more about riders working for that sprint jersey. So this event gave sort of riders an opportunity to actually fight for a couple of different jerseys. So this had the most weighting of points for the sprint jersey. Whereas, for example, the last stage is the stage that gives riders the most weighting for the mountain jersey, with it being the mountain stage. I think this is quite a good opportunity, actually, just to discuss a little bit more maybe about the dynamics of riding on IndieVelo and just the kind of the heads-up display that you can see here. So on the top left-hand corner, straightforward, time, distance, elevation gain, speed. It puts TSS and calories burned in as a sort of standard. Right in the middle there, front and centre, you've got power, heart rate, cadence, and then the gear choice that you're in. Now, for me, I'm riding a kicker bike, so actually it's got virtual gearing, so that shows up kind of in game, so you know at all times what gear you're in. It's this top right-hand corner where I think IndieVelo gets really, really interesting. So you can see the kind of arrow there and the 0 kilometers per hour with like the wind symbol. Now, this platform is affected by weather. So you can actually set wind. Wouter, who's the organizer of this event and from the Moon Riders Club, has actually elected to kind of turn wind off for this event, so there is no wind impact. But a lot of races and general riding does have wind. Now, that might sound a bit strange to some, but when you think about it, it does really help to add a certain level of dynamic to the racing, and make it more than just a sort of a game of how much power you can put out. Because if you were to try and do a breakaway and maybe attack into a headwind, like in real life, that would probably be quite a bad move because the speed is slower. I mean, when you ride into a headwind and also sort of with a tailwind, your speed is noticeably different. So if you were to try and break away, it might be a good ploy to kind of monitor the weather, monitor wind direction, and actually try and attack with a tailwind behind you, like riders might do in sort of real life racing. That way you're going to be able to carry a little bit more speed and you might have more chance of staying away. Right in the middle there, you've got that little draft bar. Now, the closer you are to a rider, or the more buried you are in the sort of the guts of a pack, or on the wheel of other riders, that draft bar will go up and go down. If I'm sat out to the side of the group as I am here, that draft bar is very, very low. And just as I come sort of back into the draft of the pack there, it is increasing. I don't know exactly what it means in the sense that how much watt saving it is, etc. But what I can say, and this is a massive, massive difference between IndieVelo and between Zwift. I don't like to I don't want to necessarily compare the platforms too closely, but Zwift is ultimately the platform that most people are kind of familiar with. And we all know that on Zwift, if you can put out less power and stay in the draft of a group. But that's something that's really difficult to feel. It's just kind of something you just kind of learn, that I can put out less power and stay in this group. But it doesn't actually feel different, except from the fact that obviously you're not riding as hard. But what I can say is on IndieVelo, and I'm not that experienced in IndieVelo racing. I haven't done masses. I mean, I'm far, far from experienced on this platform. I've probably done maybe 8 to 10 races, and a little bit of general riding. But the draft dynamics and the kind of the race sort of how that plays out as a result of all the little nuances in the riding dynamics is really, really interesting. And something I definitely can say is you absolutely, when you drop out to that draft, it really does feel significantly harder to maintain the same speed. So like I am now, I'm sat in a really good position. I'm getting a really good draft benefit, and I'm able to sit in this group sort of fairly comfortably at mid to high 200 watts. What will happen shortly is I will actually drop out to the outside of the group, and I need to kind of raise that power up to maintain the same speed as everyone else, to probably more like mid 300s. I did have a little bit of difficulty at times of just modulating my power effectively and keeping myself buried in that draft. I'm sure that it's something, the more that I use IndieVelo, you get to learn the slight differences and how it changes. And I'm sure that's something that will improve with time. But it was something that I, particularly on this stage, it was something that I noticed that I was having a little bit of difficulty just getting the... I was either kind of dropping out to the side of the pack, and then you really do lose a draft. It feels considerably harder when you're in that position to maintain the speed. But it is ultimately practice, and that was part of why I signed up to do this 4-stage tour, just to get a good bit of practice racing on the platform, and just kind of to try and develop. So we'll just chop a chunk off the middle of this video and skip forward towards the end, where it does get a little bit more interesting. There's a few other things to speak about. Okay, so the pack stayed fairly stable in regards to speed, but there's something coming up here, which is, I'm not sure how I feel about it, about how it helps the dynamics play out, but there's a little bit of an unusual thing here for IndieVelo that I just want to talk about. So there's a couple of riders off ahead, slight breakaway, but that's not really what I want to talk about. Can you see at the bottom of the screen, there's a left and a right arrow? The road ahead actually splits. and you can pick whether you want to go high road or low road. And different people in the group may choose a different option. I picked the low road, which, as you can see there, the bulk of the group actually went right. You end up in the same place in about a minute's time. But what's happened is the bulk of the group has gone one way. I've gone the other way, and I haven't got as many riders to draft off. And just as we get to the end of this split here, where the two roads come back together, I'm actually tailed off this group a little bit, or all of us who've taken the left, the low road option, are actually right at the back of this pack here. And it does take quite a bit of an effort here on my part, or on all of our parts, to actually close across that gap. It's something that you get in IndieVelo at certain points where the road splits. I mean, had I picked the high road, it would have been something that would have benefited me, because I would have been in the bigger group, the increased draft, and I'm sure it would have been something I was quite happy with. Obviously, I took the low road. It was just down to chance. So it's something that I'm not sure. I get that it adds a more interesting dynamic to the racing, but I'm not sure personally if it's something that I'm a fan of. But ultimately, it is the same for everyone, and anyone could have picked one road or the other. So it's nothing to sort of complain about. It's just something that riders, the first time it happened to me in a race, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I went one way, or a couple of us went one way, and most of the riders went the other way. But it is a point. As you can see here, there is a little group up the road there of about 4 or 5 riders that at this point I was thinking, do you know what? They might actually stay away. They try to use that. A lot of riders use this point to actually try and break away from the main pack, just because there's often a little bit of confusion. I was quite happy actually in some ways that I could see. Can you see the name there? Wout de Klaes was just in front. I know that he's a really experienced racer on the platform, and quite strong. He's the organizer of the series, and to actually see him in front of me, whilst I thought there was the possibility of this group staying away, I knew that having Wout there in front was a good wheel to follow. He knows a lot about racing on IndieVelo, so I thought that it was good wheel to follow. So I made sure I sat on his wheel, just doing this effort of kind of catching that breakaway. Just because even if it did become a breakaway, I felt that he was someone, he knows what he's doing. So I could either join the breakaway or be part of the chase to bring it back. And as it happened, we actually brought the breakaway back. It was quite a big effort. My heart rate was up well into the high 190s. But the breakaway's back and the group has reformed. It's been quite a steady race, but of a fairly high average power. So there were very few attacks. Aside from what just happened, there weren't that many attacks. There were not really any breakaway attempts, but the average sort of the pace was really quite high, and the average power to just to sort of still be in that front pack was quite high. You can see there, just on that where it says leaders, it's myself and 22 others that are still left at this point. So our front pack of leaders is now 23 riders. So it's been thinned down. There's less than half still here, but it is still also a fairly big pack. We'll just skip forward now, just to the very end of this event, and just see how the finish sprint played out. Okay, so we've rejoined the action with 2.7 kilometres left to go. Now, there is a few attacks happening. There are a few riders who are looking to go off the front here. Something I want to talk about. Can you just see the red speed flashing on the right-hand side there? It's something I mentioned during the prologue, but that's one of the differences, or it's a bit of a nuance that's quite unique to IndieVelo, is that there are certain corners in the game where there is a maximum speed that you can actually go through them with. So if that number's flashing red, it wouldn't matter if you were putting out 1,000 watts. You can't go any faster than what the maximum speed is to go through that corner. And actually, depending on what the power is that you were putting out, it actually changes how your avatar takes the corner. So if you're quite sort of in tune with it and you get it quite spot on, your avatar will take the corner in a nice line, you'll maintain a good speed. If you overcook the power, your avatar might drift out wide, and it'll actually, you lose speed, and lose a lot of positions because you actually drop back in the group because you're out of the draft, you've taken the corner too hard. So that's something that I definitely know I need to practice. As this race went on, I felt that my actual positioning within the group was getting slightly better. Now, something that I did want to do, and something that I've noticed in a couple of the races here, the sprint finishes here, you don't really pass through riders quite in the same way that you might do on Zwift. So on Zwift, it's quite common to have a large pack. You can be at any point in that pack, and then you can power through the pack and use the pack as the draft. That has changed slightly with the new dynamics, but on IndieVelo, it does tend to stretch out, and it seems to be quite a long time before you actually kick through the rider in front of you. So something that I was keen to do was just maintain a good position towards the front of this group. So I'm working quite hard here. I mean, the heart rate's up in the 190s, but I am working quite hard to maintain that position until that point, where for some reason that I'm not quite that sure of, I got thrown out right up to the left-hand side of that group. I was staying in maybe the top 5. I've been kind of pushed right up to the left-hand side of the group there as we went through that kilometre to go, not arch, but the red sort of flames. And I got pushed right out wide. So I've had to use, pretty much over this last kilometre, I'm needing to use a really big effort to actually go back up in the group and begin closing to some of these riders. So when the actual sprint kind of kicks off, I've used an awful lot of my energy. And for me, I do a really poor sprint. I mean, I only peak at, I think it was about 960, something like that, which for myself is I'd expect a lot more than that. Because I've used so much kind of effort just to kind of move back up in this pack. I really then didn't have it. So I finished in 7th there, heart rate up at 206. So it was quite a big effort, but I was a little bit disappointed in my sort of place. I think it might be down a little bit to just myself. I haven't raced extensively on the platform, and just kind of maybe not understanding how the dynamics play out. So it's something that I knew after this race. I knew it was something I definitely needed to go away and really learn more about, just about how the dynamics play out, because I'm sure that had I been able to play that slightly differently, I could have had a better result. Okay, so we're here now on the start of stage 3. So this was on the Wednesday evening, and this is known as the hilly round. This, it was 7 laps of a circuit, a 2.3, I want to say, kilometre circuit, that contained 3 punchy climbs. It was going to be really, really tough, and we were taking on 7 laps of that. Well, 8 laps if we include actually the lead-in. Going to be a really tough attritional race. It was only 19.7k long, and it contained about 350-ish metres of climbing over these 3 short, punchy hills. Again, it's just the type of race that sometimes, if you're feeling good, you feel almost unbeatable at times. Do you know what I mean? You're powering over the lumps, you're staying in the group, and you feel really good. Or it's the type of race that can really, really hurt you. As you can see here, there is actually a pace spot that's just setting the pace, leading out. A lot of the races I've noticed on IndieVelo have this, and it tends to just be it's set up. It's something a race organiser can set up, and nobody actually can pass that pace spot during the initial lead-in. So it's usually around a kilometre here. But what happens here, and this is something that really nearly caught me out in this race, I came up to the back of the pace spot, and it really just suddenly breaks you back. So I've kind of nearly passed that bot, and I've shot right back in the group. And the main pack, the riders that have ridden that better than me, and maintained a good steady pace. At these sort of fireworks then here, the pace spot stops, and the race is now on. And I was right towards the back of this pack. So I'm looking up ahead. We're on to this first climb, and there's riders out ahead in front of me who are the riders that I know I need to keep close on. If I want to have a good GC finish, I need to stay close and tight to these riders. So this was a point where I nearly ruined my own race before it actually begun, because I was thrown right to the back of the pack, and just at the base of that first climb I had to do quite a big effort actually to make sure that I didn't get tailed off, and I worked my way back up through those riders. So straight away that put me in not in the best position beginning this race. That was the longest of these climbs. What was it, 400 meters long? It was at a steep downhill at the side before we hit the second little kicker, which was a little bit steeper but not quite as long, and then there was another third sort of shorter kicker on this lap. And these laps came quickly, these hills came quickly, and again I just get it wrong here on the descent. I backed off too much. Now I'm not far from experienced racing on IndieVelo, and I've backed off, and a lot of riders have surged past me, and it does take quite to catch the draft, it feels like, and maybe this is my inexperience, but to actually catch the draft up again, when you're in the draft, it feels really strong. On IndieVelo, it feels strong, but in order to catch it again, you have to put in quite a big effort. And those riders were a couple of seconds up the road ahead of me. They sort of pushed on. I was in 17th position there, needing to make another big effort to actually close across this gap. So initially, I was feeling okay after the prologue and stage one. The legs were feeling okay. They were a bit sore, but generally speaking, feeling all right. But again, we're on to the third little hump here, and needing to put in another effort to actually close that gap. So my first lap, I really did not ride very well. I nearly got tailed off on a couple of occasions. So I knew that between now and the sort of maybe 35 seconds to a minute there was between this and the next ascent of that main climb, I needed to just back off slightly and try and get as much recovery as I could before hitting the climbs again. And obviously, of course, trying to make sure that I didn't make the same mistakes on our next ascent of the climb and our sort of descent off the other side. Okay, so the race fell into a fairly predictable rhythm. I'd found myself in the lead group of 14 riders. There were only actually 14 of us left from the 42 that started. A lot of the riders you can see ahead are drop riders that we're lapping, where we went quite hard on the climbs, eased off slightly for 10-15 seconds descent, and then very hard again. And at this point, I was pushing hard. I was certainly putting an effort in, but I was feeling okay. I didn't feel as if I was going to get imminently dropped. And like I say, our group we actually dropped just down there to about 10 riders. I think we lost a couple on that ascent, but heart rate's up to 190. It's a big effort. It's a hard effort, but I didn't feel as if I was going to get tailed off at this point. I could have hung on the front. But I think I'll make a bit of an error here. I sort of didn't realise that our group was splitting. Our group kind of pretty much split in half. And I got myself caught on the wrong side of it here. We go quite fast down that descent. And yes, really a point that I got caught out here. A couple of riders coming across. I did kick a little bit to come up this sort of steeper, shorter kick. But this group split in half, and I was on the wrong side of it. So up the road was 7 riders, and then we had a group of, I think, 4 or 5, if I remember rightly, who were became group 2 on the road. So I was a little bit disappointed, actually, because, I was hurting. You can clearly see from the video there I am hurting. But I felt like I could have maintained that pace. It was just more, again, maybe it's just that I'm not quite in tune with how the dynamics of the game plays out. But yeah, it was something I was a bit disappointed about, because I wanted to stay in that front group. I thought maybe I could, maybe I'd have the sort of ability to stay there, or the strength to stay there, but just got caught the wrong side, and then I could have held on, I think, but I wouldn't have had the legs to go across the gap. Definitely not. So again, I think the next few laps, that group up ahead pull out I think it's up to a minute lead. They pull out over us by the finish line, and our group here does back off slightly, but we sort of stick together. We lose a couple of riders, but we sort of stick together towards the finish. So we'll just drop onto the last lap. We'll have a little look at it, just how it plays out. So we're into the last K&a-half. There's currently 6 riders out in front, 5 riders out in front, and I'm in 6th position there in our little group of sort of 5 or 6 chasers. You've got Igor Corpse, who's off the front there, and then there's this small chase group just behind him, and then there's Roman Hubel behind that. Those 2 riders, Igor Corpse and Roman Hubel, apologies if I'm not pronouncing either of their names correctly, were very, very strong in this series. They were in, I think they took first and second between them on every stage. Super strong riders. That initial group that had headed off up the road did split very slightly, and we caught a couple of the riders, but we were now, the best position we could finish in this group was actually 6th, which was okay maybe for finish line points for things like the green jersey, but what was a disappointment was that I lost nearly a minute to the leaders here in the GC time. So I was still on sort of 38 seconds down from the front. I mean, it wasn't something that I had as a target to kind of to win or to finish really highly. I just wanted to finish as highly as I could in the series. But actually, losing a minute on this stage was something I was a little bit disappointed about. I felt like I could have hung on that front group. I'm not saying I could have challenged for the win, but I do feel I could have hung on that group. We've got 400 metres left here. Just kick that power up. It's not exactly what you'd call a sprint power, with it being such an attritional race, but it was just enough power just to go through those riders. And on this downhill the other side, I knew that I would be able to just build up some speed with not crazy high power, but just by kicking over the top and maintaining speed down the other side, just to kind of stay away from the chaser. So I finished a second ahead of the others in my group there, but I was a minute and 2 seconds down on the winners. A really tough race. Do you know, it was probably one of the toughest races that I've done. It was a normalised power of 370. 388. Apologies. A normalised power of 388, which is really, it's the highest normalised power I've ever had. I mean, even the average power was nearly 350, and that's after getting dropped and our group going a little bit slower. So it was a really tough race. Really, really tough race. Okay, so we're just about to leave the pens on stage 4. Which this was the hilly stage, the mountain stage, I should say. So we had 2 ascents of a 2.5 kilometre climb. We were going up it twice, and basically the route was up the hill, down the hill, up the hill, down the hill, with very, very little in between. We were heading out. There was just over, I think it was 1.6 kilometres until we actually hit the base of the climb. We were behind the pace spot for the start, and remembering what happened to me yesterday on stage 3, I did not want to go too hard sort of into that pace spot and get bounced back through the group, because I had, for myself, I was now a minute and 38, minute and 40 down on GC. I was sitting in 8th place, but I thought that a top 5 finish was realistic. I was about 20 seconds down on the rider in 5th place. So that was something. I'd set a little bit of a target of, 1, giving it my best effort. I mean, I've learned an awful lot over these days racing on IndieVelo. I've really, really enjoyed myself. It's been a nice change from the sort of the what can sometimes be predictable, although it's less predictable these days with the changing of the pack dynamics in Zwift. The racing, I've really enjoyed getting to learn more about how the racing on IndieVelo plays out. I've really pushed myself quite hard and deep on a few stages, day after day, back to back. So it's been a really, really enjoyable experience. But on this hilly stage, this mountain stage, I wasn't sure how I was going to go. I don't. My sustained power isn't always the best. And even though I didn't show it in race 2, I'm generally speaking, I'm better at a sprint type effort. So I didn't know actually if I was to sit in and try and react to riders, I didn't know how that was going to go. So I wanted to try and take a little bit of time back on riders, and I felt that a way of me approaching this race today was to actually just kind of go all in. So I was planning on hitting the bottom of that climb. We hit the bottom of the climb very, very soon. And my plan was to go basically as hard as I could to the top of it. If I dropped riders, and I did a sort of a Chris Froome in the 2018 Giro, where he brought back minutes on GC to get a really good result. Amazing. I didn't think that was that likely to happen. But if it happened and I got away and built up a gap, amazing. Maybe I could do a miraculous move back up the GC standings. But it was also a way that I could just put in a really good effort, really hard effort, and actually get some really good training out of it. I mean, if I just blew and ended up finishing well down in this race, it didn't matter. That was my feeling. It really didn't matter. It's not as if there was anything on it as far as like a team racing event goes. So I didn't mind going all in, blowing up, finishing right out the back of the field. So literally we hit the base of the climb here, and I'm sitting in the sort of in the guts in the middle of the pack, and I just decide I sit in on this initial steeper section. I sit in a little bit here on this slightly shallower section, but then I just stand up. I put it in a big gear and I decide, I know that the climb is going to take around 8 to 10 minutes probably, and I just decided I was going to just put in the best effort I could and go as hard as I could, and just basically see what happens. You can see up ahead there's 2 riders, and that is Roman Hubel and Igor Korps. They are first and second on GC. They're over a minute ahead, I believe it is. Or at least they finished well ahead of everyone else. 2 strongest riders. They had gone very, very long here. Very, very early, very, very long. And they built out basically an unassailable lead. They were in an absolute different league to anyone. As you can see in the rider list on the right-hand side, there are gaps growing. That field, there's riders there's one where I'm just coming past Wouter here, then there's a rider just on my wheel, and then there's 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. So that the field is stringing out. So I'm just kind of holding basically what I can. I wasn't trying to pace it on looking at the power. I was doing it off feel. Staying out of the saddle on the slightly steeper sections and grinding a big gear and just churning out as much power as I can. I mean, I had really good legs on this stage. I didn't expect to have them. They kind of came out of nowhere. I was going up this hill and I kept looking at the power thinking, it's like, I did sit down here, had a little bit of a sort of a rest for the arms really by kind of sitting down. But at this point, it was only Wouter was on my wheel, and then Jan van der Linden, he's just behind. But the other riders are actually starting to tail off. And seeing Nick, perhaps I'm pronouncing his surname correctly, Greenhalgh, or Green, apologies if I got that wrong. He's a really strong rider, and I knew that he was it could have been 3rd or 4th, and it was between him and Wouter for that GC slot, that final podium slot, I should say. And to see him getting gapped slightly was really, really motivating. So I sort of got out the saddle on the steeper section, and again was churning kind of mid 400 watts. My legs felt really good. I don't know where that kind of came from. I didn't think I'd be able to maintain that power to the top, but I kind of didn't really care. I was just going to go sort of as hard as I could for as long as I could and just kind of see what happened and put in the best effort I could to try and lift myself higher up the GC standings. Okay, so I've just gone towards the end of the climb. I just sat down on this slightly shallower section, but the effort's really starting to bite. I've sat on the front here just driving it. I wasn't really worried about Wouters on my tail. We've actually put 5 seconds at this point into Nick, and then there's another rider, Marcel Schubert. It was 5 seconds down, and then the riders then are kind of 14, 15, 16 seconds back on from there. I sat on the front till this point, and I was really blowing. I was really, really starting to blow. It was more that I spent so much time out of the saddle that the lactic that built up in my arms was quite intense, and it was really, really painful. So I needed to have a little sit down. So I just thought I'll drop onto Wouter's wheel there, and just try and get. You can see that draft bar has gone up a little bit. So even though we're on a climb, there is still a draft benefit from actually sitting on him. And I just needed to get a little bit of recovery. The heart rate is up at 190, but for me that is not uncommon while putting in a hard effort, so that's not ridiculously high. It didn't peak, it didn't really spike up too high, but right at the end of this climb you can just kind of see it on the road there, just as the road goes around the corner. There's a short, steeper section, and Nick has just got back onto us. Nick has just got back on, and I can feel that the pace is just sort of lifting as he drafts through. So this was a point here where I feel I could maybe have been distanced just to get to the steeper section. So it was really important. I just got out the saddle, bunged it in a big gear, and just kind of stamped my way up. And this was an effort that I was really quite happy, proud that I'd managed to make, because it'd gone really deep. And I had faded, but I hadn't sort of blown, and I was then quite happy that I was able, on the fourth day of racing, 16-17% gradient this year, happy to just kind of find a little bit of something just to stay in touch. So that banner there's the top of the climb. I think Marcel Schubert, you can see him, he's at 3 seconds. He just gets back into us. So we actually end up as a group of 4. You got the 2, Igor and Roman, who were up ahead. They were well gone. And then there's our little group of 4. I was really hurting at this point. Really, really hurting. I was glad to see a couple of riders coming through. I thought at this point, Nick accelerated, and I thought he might. He's another name that I know from IndieVelo racing, seeing about. He's again, a very, very experienced racer on the platform. And he's someone who I was kind of marking, thinking he knows what he's doing. And at this point, he started to accelerate away. He was going a lot faster than us, and he had a 2-second advantage. And I was wondering whether he was actually going to go into break away from us. And at this point, I was concerned I may get dropped. I had to dig really deep to actually stay on the wheel of these riders. And just sort of maintain that draft, and I was really looking forward to the descent. Actually, I knew we had another climb, a matter of a few minutes away up the same climb. I didn't know how that was going to go, but we'll skip forward just to the end of that climb and just discuss how that played out. Okay, so the second climb played out much the same as the first. Right at the start, we did distance Marcel Schubert there. He's 26 seconds down. He was dropped quite early on. And again, I sort of sat on the front. I did as much effort as I could over the first half of the climb. Myself, Wout sort of stayed with me. We did actually, again, put about 4 or 5 seconds into Nick. But yet again, towards the end of the climb, he clawed that back. Now, I think that was probably maybe partly us slowing. I got to about halfway up this climb and I was really blown. I was really, really hurting. And Wouter came through. I sat on wheels for the second half of that climb. Nick closed to us just before that steeper section. And again, I felt he might very well pull away here. But I was really proud of the effort I put in. in order to actually stay here. So I did one big effort the first time up, and I had to kick here a couple of times while really hurting. This was really, really good training for me. I kicked super hard on a couple of occasions to actually kind of make sure that I stayed with these guys. And I didn't get distance, because you can see the state that I'm in the video there, in the picture-in-picture. But I kicked again, kick over 400 watts when you've already done that effort is really tough. So I managed to kick. I was really proud of that, staying in with these guys. And the fact, actually, it was 2 efforts back to back. So you had the first climb and then the second climb. Now, over this past winter, I've done a lot more base training and a lot more of those long, steady, high zone 2 hours than I've done in previous years. And the reason why I started doing a lot more zone 2 and a really good base this year was because I felt as if over the last couple of years I've become a little bit less resilient. I've done a lot of kind of virtual racing and riding over the last few years. In fact, that's becoming the thing I do more now rather than even ride a bike outside. And it was a lot short races. I'm often on and off the bike within an hour. And what I'd noticed is that kind of endurance had really sort of regressed. And I felt as if it was making me less resilient. Like, I maybe had one big effort. Like, if this was a 1-lap race, maybe last winter I might have held on for 1 lap. But what I know would have happened is I would have gone on to the second ascent of the climb. And I really wouldn't have had that sort of resilience to recover and go again. And which is part of the reason why I started doing a lot more base training over this winter, just to kind of build up that ability to kind of recover and develop just a general engine to actually be able to go again. And I was really pleased that, having done this race, that seemed to be something that has made quite a big difference. We didn't go up the climb the second time as hard as we did the first time, but we certainly pushed hard. We pushed really, really hard. It nearly broke me, but I was proud that I would manage to hang on. I was really pleased with the effort. We're just onto the descent. You can see that Roman and Iger are 1 minute 44 and 1:33 up ahead, and myself, Wouter and Nick are kind of descending together. I'll just drop through to the last few hundred metres and we'll see how the finish here played out and how the finish was. So we went down the descent and Nick hit out really hard on the descent to try and break it. I was nearly tailed off at that point. Wouter followed it really quickly, and I was sort of just the third rider reacting, and it nearly, the two of them nearly got away. I did manage to get back on. We're just into the last few hundred metres here, and we've backed right off. I'm looking there, I can see Nick's speed go green, so I know he's attacking. 600 metres out, I knew it was going to hurt. I just thought, I'll go now. It didn't really matter as far as sprint point, finish line points go. I was never in contention. These two guys, Nick and Wouter, were there for third and fourth on GC. I knew I'd done enough to move up to fifth in GC. But I still wanted to try and get third on the stage. So I just kicked, managed to come through. And what I was saying earlier on about it seems to take a long time to come through the draft of another rider. It seems to take a long time to really break through their kind of draft there. But I came through I did enough of a sprint just to come through there. And I actually finished third on the stage, which was my best finish on probably the stage that I was thinking I'd do the worst on. But yeah, it wasn't to be, and it was really nice. I really, really enjoyed that stage. I mean, enjoyed in kind of inverted commas, but I set out with a plan and actually really managed to kind of make it work there. Really proud of the third place finish, and managed to climb up to fifth overall in GC. Really enjoyed. I learned an awful lot about racing on IndieVelo. I pushed myself really, really hard. So I actually set up new power PBs over 5 different kind of durations. So I jointed my best ever 5 minutes. I got a new best ever 8 minute. I got a new best 10 minute, a new best 20 minute, and a new best 30-minute power. And what was really pleasing was that they were set those PBs during the Moonriders tour, but they were not set while targeting a specific duration. They were set sort of whilst racing. So that was something I was really pleased of. For me, a 10-minute power PB of just under 400 watts on that climb in stage 4, which is something that I never thought would be possible, to actually hold that sort of power for that duration. So it was something I really enjoyed. I've learned an awful lot. Could I have finished higher in GC? I actually finished 5th. Could I have finished higher? Maybe. I might have been able. First and second, as I mentioned, were well ahead. They were on a totally different level. I maybe could have finished 3rd or 4th. It was Wouter finished 3rd and Nick finished 4th, and I finished just over a minute down on the two of them. And that was basically the minute that was lost on stage 3, on the hilly stage, where I got caught the wrong side of that split and distanced slightly. So that is something that maybe I could have done a little bit better on, but I've learned a lot. I really enjoyed the tour, and it's really pushed me on to reach limits that I didn't think I could reach. So yeah, really good, and looking forward to whatever comes next.